There we go, and we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of The Rational Standard. I am Martin van Staden, and I am joined today by Nicholas Woode-Smith and Ayanda Zulu. Our other colleagues, David and Zakes, are abroad, flying high the flag of liberty. So we're going to be the panel for this week, and last week, for some reason, I closed off by saying something along the lines of, well, hopefully, we're not going to be talking about the US South Africa relations again next week, completely forgetting that this week's episode was going to be on the 1st of August. And what is the 1st of August? Well, the 1st of August is the day that the United States is ridiculous 30% tariff on all goods that South Africa exports to the US gets implemented. So from today, I don't know whether they're in fact implementing it. I'm assuming they are. All goods will be 30% more expensive for American consumers. But that might also mean that South African sellers would then start being discounted in favor of American homemade goods. That is, of course, the point of Donald Trump's tariffs, is to ensure that Americans buy American and buy less from other countries because of the trade deficit, what he calls the trade deficit between our countries, that Americans buy more from South Africa than South Africa sells, rather than from the other way around. And that is, of course, not a good way to approach trade. But that is what the Americans have pinned their colors to. And last week we discussed that the South African government has done very little to try and normalize this relationship. The Americans have told us, kind of in bullet form, what it is that they want from us. And every time our press or our politicians speak about that, they say that they have no idea what the Americans want. They don't understand. But we've known for at least 2 or 3 months now exactly what the Americans want. They couldn't be clearer if they tried. So this is, to a very large degree, a self-imposed burden that South Africans will now have to face. Obviously, it's also a self-imposed burden that the American consumer will have to face. They're not just imposing tariffs on South Africa. Various other countries like South Korea, Europe, and so on have also been hit by tariffs, and they, to their credit, have tried to negotiate some kind of deal. I think South Africa only kind of stopped snoozing, or our government stopped snoozing about a week ago and tried to rush to sign some kind of deal in a hopelessly truncated time period. So yeah, guys, we are gonna get into another topic a little bit later, but I just want to get a sense from you. What do you make of this, Ayanda? Do you think that the South African government has taken this seriously enough, or is it just another day in uh, in sunny South Africa for them and nothing to see here, basically?
Um, Thank you very much, Martin, for that brilliant introduction. While I don't think they have taken it seriously, I think one of the things that I did mention last week was even the posture of someone like the president, who, when he was interviewed by the media, sort of laughed it off, and said, "We're still going to speak about it." So I don't think it has been taken seriously. As you've said, they waited for the last minute, and now they're scrambling, trying to sort of strike some kind of deal. So the government, in my view, has been unbothered, for a very long time about this. And now we're in a position where these tariffs, as far as I'm concerned, are coming into effect from today. 30% tariff increase. I think what I find interesting is that on the African continent, many other countries are also going to experience these tariff increases, but for them, they are far lower than us. For example, Lesotho is going to receive a 15% tariff increase, whereas on our end, we're getting a 30% tariff increase. And I think that also speaks to something which you've said, Martin. Part of the reason why we're getting such a high tariff increase is not just because of Washington's broader trade strategy. It's because we're also being, in a sense, punished by America for some of the things which we haven't addressed as a country. We spoke about these things in last week's podcast. The demands that Washington has made, and because we have refused to negotiate consistently with Washington in good faith, I believe that in part these tariff increases have been informed by that. So we have a government that has not only refused to negotiate in good faith with Washington, but we have a government that has shown Washington that it doesn't take it seriously, and it isn't willing to take these things seriously. And now we're in a position where ordinary South Africans and businesses are going to be affected by these tariff increases. It's unfortunate. And again, those politicians who are in government, who are in positions of power, they couldn't care less because at the end of the day, they have their fat salaries, they have their perks, they have their benefits. The people who are going to be affected are you and I and millions of other South Africans in this country who will have difficulty, by the way, accessing the American market with these tariff increases. So just to close it off for now, I think our government has really, really dropped the ball. It's not surprising. It's true to form, but they have not taken this seriously. And now we find ourselves in a position where we're going to feel the sting of these tariff increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicholas, I'll come to you now, but just kind of further to Ayanda's point is that I think it was this week. I think it was something called the kind of all equal kind of conference or something by one of the political foundations, where Mtabisi Jonas, the so-called special envoy of the South African government to the US, was speaking, and it was out in Sandton, not in New York or in Washington. So just unless there's any kind of confusion about where in the world our special envoy to the United States is, he is in South Africa, and he's been in South Africa for his whole tenure as our special envoy to the United States. He said that South Africans need to stop spreading dis and misinformation to other countries, specifically the United States. And he didn't say exactly who he was referring to, but I mean, we're not stupid. We know exactly that he was speaking here about AfriForum, Solidarity, the Freedom Front, the Afrikaner delegation, about the DA, Emma Powell, who spoke to Americans, and Andrew Whitfield, as we know. He said we must be patriotic and we must tell the truth about South Africa. So from the government side, as Ayanda kind of said there, they're just doubling down. They're like, well, what do these Americans know? They're just being misled by some miscreants here from South Africa, so they don't actually know what's going on. We just have to kind of tough it out. There was before Cyril Ramaphosa went to the US for his much publicized meeting with Trump, there was a lot of worry that he was going to go there to try and lecture Trump about what's really happening in South Africa, and kind of we're transforming, so don't worry. And you can just still see that mentality here. Nicholas, what do you make of this? It seems a bit odd that I mean, it's one thing to say that South Africa kind of wants to be seen as the sovereign state, but this kind of condescension from the South African government to the American federal government, it just seems a little bit misplaced. What do you make of that?
I think that the ANC is completely convinced of its own moral superiority and its own superiority in general. I think that its hostility towards the United States and the West in general is based on its continued delusion that the Cold War never ended. And I think, especially with the old ANC vanguard, and it's been inherited by the younger members now, they have never ended that they don't like America because they perceive that America aided in apartheid, ignoring the fact that it was American sanctions that helped tear down apartheid, and also ignoring the fact that America probably would have backed the ANC if the ANC had actually gone to them and not just immediately sided with the Soviets. And also, you can see this inherited, though, is that I was thinking that a big reason that the ANC doesn't like Israel, besides the fact that it's very likely receiving bribes from a lot of the Gulf states and Iran, is also because Israel, as another pariah state during the 20th century, actually was a semi-trade partner with the apartheid regime. So were a lot of other countries. So was Saudi Arabia. So what are they going to? So are they going? They're not really being consistent there. But I think a lot of the ANC's for domestic and foreign policy is founded in delusion. The delusions of grandeur, where they're completely convinced that that South Africa and they do not need the United States. They think that they probably don't even think that they need China or Russia. They probably think that they can act in a vacuum. I remember the last time I was on this podcast, I spoke about how some people wearing ANC t-shirts and people wearing EFF t-shirts getting along were at one of those military showings off where they're firing all their ammunition before it expires. And they were shouting about how they're going to destroy the West, how they're far more powerful than America. And it was just a guy firing an LMG into full spray. And I think that there's this very big ignorance among our politicians and our government. They don't understand how big this world is and how tiny we are in comparison.
Now, I like the way you phrased that, delusions of grandeur. I remember, what was it? I think it was about 2 years ago. So this was during the Biden administration in the US. So kind of a relatively left-wing administration. And something was happening in Venezuela. And for some reason, some ANC senior government person felt the need to kind of add their voice to something that was happening. And they said something along the lines of, if the United States intervenes in Venezuela with their military, the Biden administration, then South Africa will deploy the SANDF to go and help Venezuela fight off the Americans. And I just thought of that when you said delusions of grandeur. I mean, we just deployed to the Eastern Congo last year, fighting off a poor rebel group, and we decisively lost that battle. And we exfiltrated, like the troops were brought back to South Africa through Rwanda, which was our primary enemy there. So no, there's no South Africa has no power projection, and this is something that our politicians seem to be the least to understand. And that means, I think, Ayanda, we need to be humble to some degree, and I don't think being humble means we need to be pushovers as a country or as a government that represents us, but at least some more kind of humility and recognition of where we find ourselves. Biaki Dlamini, one of our good colleagues and friends, he's very much kind of in this foreign policy space, and he has said that South Africa must focus on kind of being the big boy in Africa and kind of upping its own influence in Africa and becoming a stronger state. And I completely support that sentiment. But we're just not there yet. Even in Africa, even inside Africa, we are a relatively weak player. We have strong vibes about us. We like to pretend like we're Africa's big boy, but it doesn't seem to show. So, Ayanda, what's your sense of this?
Well, I think my sense of it is pretty much yours, Martin. I don't think we can lay any claim to a hegemonic position on the African continent, let alone our region, the SADC region. And the simple reason for that is a hegemonic force in any part of the world needs to have resolved its own internal issues. And if you look at our own country and the levels of poverty and the many other issues that we have, I don't think there's any way in which we can assume a position of leadership when we have failed to do so within our own borders. So it's going to be very difficult for us to do that or earn the respect of other countries in our region if we can't manage our own internal affairs. So that is the first part of it. The second part of it, again, to what you've said, I think national sovereignty is important. And I don't think any of us are saying that we should allow America or any other country to push us over. But equally, the national interest is important. And here's where I want to make a point that many people don't seem to understand. There's a big difference between our interests as a country and the ANC's interests as a party. And what you find often is that the ANC wants to convince the rest of us, or to try and portray its own interests as being reflective of our interests as a country. So they will say something like supporting Palestine, for instance, or being seen with Iran or any other state that sponsors terrorism is somehow in our national interests. It isn't in our national interests. What is in our national interests, as an example, is to try and repair our relationship with Washington. But when the ANC is meeting its friends or its allies in Iran, or wherever, they are doing that themselves because Iran, by the way, is funding them. They were almost liquidated a few years back. We know for a fact that Iran funneled money to them. And that is why they're doing all these funny things, taking photographs with all these people. It's because they are still beholden to Iran for assisting them to avoid liquidation. But what is in our national interest as a country is to do exactly what we spoke about last week. Number one, take the issue of farm murders seriously. Stop dismissing people who are raising it as right wingers, or fringe voices who are spreading propaganda. Number two, scrap BEE entirely. Don't reform it. Don't do anything to it. It is harming our economy. It is deterring investment. It has destroyed millions of jobs in this country. Get rid of the policy and actually adopt a sound approach to economics that is going to attract the kind of investment that we need so we can create jobs in this country. Number three, the Expropriation Act. If you can't revise the act, do away with that altogether entirely. But that act, as it stands right now, and we spoke about this last week, makes it very easy for the government, under the fuzzy label of public interest, to really take land from people for very arbitrary reasons. So that as well is a concern. Deal with that too. So those are the kinds of issues that you need to deal with. And I think with Washington, applying pressure on us, this isn't a question of national sovereignty. This is a question of a country which appears to know its values and is simply saying that we need to do certain things within our own borders, to really ensure that no citizen in this country feels as if they aren't a part of this country, or no citizen feels under threat, or in danger. So those are the things that we need to resolve. But the ANC's posture is not helpful. The posture of dismissing these legitimate concerns as propaganda, or trying to misrepresent Solidarity or AfriForum or whoever else may be trying to engage the American government, hasn't been helpful. What they need to do, as I've said earlier on, is to engage the American government and try to reach a resolution that is going to benefit us as a country. But the kind of posture that we have, in fact, isn't a posture grounded in humility. In my view, it's an arrogant posture. It's a government of South Africa really giving Washington the middle finger and telling them that we don't care about what you're saying, or what you're proposing. We will do things our way. And this is why we're here. And if it doesn't change, we can expect to see more things coming in the next few months, or even in the next year. And then again, at the end of the day, it is ordinary South Africans who are going to get affected, not politicians, not people in positions of power. It is us, the people, who at this point even have to pay the salaries of two police ministers, by the way. We are going to suffer at the end of the day, not them. So they need to change their posture, as I've said, and renegotiate or attempt to engage the American government on these issues so we can avoid any more issues in the future.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And Nicholas, I just want to bring you in here before we move on to the next topic. And Ayanda noted the issue of sovereignty there, and this seems to be the kind of most popular fallback rebuttal, is to say that, well, we're a sovereign country, so actually the Americans just shouldn't say anything about it. Of course, we don't kind of mention that we're taking also another sovereign country to the ICJ, and we enjoy kind of going around the world saying things and doing things, but when that's turned around on South Africa, and sorry, I keep using we, I need to start being more conscious of that. It's not we, it's the ANC, the GNU at least. Um, uh, so the ANC appeals to sovereignty. You've written some interesting stuff many years ago that I think is still very relevant about what does sovereignty really mean, as a kind of a topic of international relations? Does it mean that you can just do whatever you want as a country and no one can touch you on that? Or does the concept of sovereignty also contain a element of responsibility? You don't just have a right to do anything, you also have a responsibility, the responsibility to your own people and so forth. So just some of your thoughts on that would be quite interesting, I think.
So what you're talking about there is the responsibility to protect, which is a concept in foreign relations where you believe that other countries have a right to intervene in the country if they believe that they are protecting the people within that country. Because sovereignty isn't just something where a government has absolute control to do whatever it wants inside its borders. Now that's not sovereignty, that's a dictatorship. Sovereignty is the idea that a nation has a particular territory and that other countries which are legitimate need to respect that territory. And this doesn't mean that, they have to support what they're doing, they have to, like the vibes. Every country's sovereignty and every government has a prerogative to set the standards in which they deal with each other. So there's in no stretch of the imagination is America violating South Africa's sovereignty. What they're doing is they're setting conditions for their relationship with us. And that is completely fine. That's completely reasonable. Otherwise, it would be an incredibly toxic relationship. Can you imagine in relationships between people where we get angry because someone doesn't like us hitting them randomly? So, oh no, they're violating our sovereignty, my right to assault them. No, and also at the same time, probably this would be probably more appropriate. Let's say you don't want to be friends with someone because they abuse their dog. You're not violating their ownership of their dog. You are expressing your own moral virtues, and you're not saying, "Oh, I'm going to steal your dog." You're saying, "I just don't want to deal with you if you're going to do that." This is the same with America's conditions on South Africa now. They are, if anything, they're trying to tell us, hey, be a sovereign country, respect the people within your borders, follow your own, actually fulfill the social contract which you have with your citizens. Because right now, you're not acting like a legitimate government. You're not undertaking any of the bare minimum foundations of what it means to be a state. And another thing on sovereignty, because it's a buzzword not just the ANC uses, it's African dictators and Middle Eastern dictators love using this word all the time. And they will, and literally to the point where they'll be invading their neighbors. And when the Europeans and the Americans come and say, stop invading your neighbors, they say, stop violating our sovereignty. I'm pretty sure Gaddafi said this when he invaded Chad. It's our sovereign right to invade, to violate the sovereignty of our neighbors. I don't think they know what it means. So it's and I think that whenever we see most people, unless someone is an actual political scientist, don't listen to them when they're using the word sovereignty. They don't know what it means.
No, exactly. It is with the I'll come to you now, Ayanda. With democracy and with human rights, it's kind of become one of those buzzwords that kind of it's just a good thing. And if someone does something we don't like, we just kind of put a blindfold on and grab the word. And if it's democracy or human rights or sovereignty, we can just deploy it for any purpose. So no, exactly. We need to be conscious of what these things mean, and sovereignty cannot just be the right to do as you please. As you say, Nicholas, it also means you have to behave yourself as a sovereign. You look after your people in a good way and in a way that fulfills the social contract. So well put, Ayanda.
Yes, I just wanted to add on to what Nicholas said there, and sort of expose the double standards or the hypocrisy here. He mentioned something very important about how the USA isn't undermining our sovereignty; it's just setting its own conditions, for its relationship and our trade ties with it. The ANC could well argue that BE is our policy, and any country that wants to work with us has to comply with those laws. And you've never heard any country up until now saying that, oh, you're undermining our sovereignty or anything like that. Those countries say it's fine. If BE, we have to comply with BE, we will comply with BE and invest in the country. Now, suddenly, when the USA is saying we don't want that BE, we don't want to comply with those things. There's suddenly a cry about sovereignty now. So I find that very rich from South Africa, where you expect other countries to comply to your local laws. And then when they tell you that they won't comply with your laws, you turn around and cry and scream about sovereignty. That's the one aspect of hypocrisy. The other aspect of hypocrisy, again, has to do with countries and their own domestic policies and what steps that they take. South Africa, on its own accord, chose to take, not South Africa, but the ANC, let me be clear, chose to take Israel to The Hague. They did that for their own reasons. They could defend it and say, no, that was in, the national interest, or we are a sovereign state, we can do those things. But when America, for instance, assists Israel with whatever it assisted with, again, that is an issue. You have the ANC again shouting, they're killing people or they're supporting genocide or whatever. So it is this hypocrisy again that you see from the ANC, where seemingly it wants the freedom to do certain things, but when other people want to do those things, it's a problem. They mustn't be allowed to do those things. They must be called murderers and rapists and all kinds of things, that you hear from ANC leaders. So my call to them as well is to stop with the double standards. If you want to do something, do it, but don't block other people from doing it as well.
Yeah, very good point. Absolutely, it's as you said. There's a delusion of grandeur, and that is, I think, very typically an example of narcissistic behavior. This idea that they are so great that certain rules just do not apply to them, but they do apply to others. And you do see this certainly with the ANC in foreign policy, but also in domestic policy. Kind of a recent example, I guess, is this thing about the urinals in that restaurant in I think it's in the Free State, where apparently if you kind of pee on ANC politician's face, then you must be subject to criminal prosecution. But kind of if we insult each other here, the ANC will say, no, you see, we abolished criminal defamation last year when we amended the Criminal Procedure Act. So no, it's freedom of expression. But oh, if you touch us, no, then it's time to go to prison. So yeah, complete hypocrisy, complete double standards, and it's incumbent on South Africans really, because the ANC isn't going to come to this conclusion on its own. It's incumbent on us to make it go there, to point these things out, and to put pressure on the party and some other political parties as well that exhibit some similar arrogant sentiments. Okay, so I think that kind of wraps up the foreign relations aspect. There's just for the last half of the show, I wanted to discuss this thing about privatization of, let's say, municipal assets. Not all of us are Joburgers, but I think the Johannesburg situation kind of brought the topic into light recently in over the last month or so. So, kind of a summary is this, and there's a lot of confusion currently of the city saying no, people are misunderstanding, but kind of the bird's eye view is this. Johannesburg's property company owns several parks throughout the city. Some of them are kind of used as country clubs. They're being leased out. Some of them are kind of straight up residential parks. And it came out about a month or so ago that the property company has put out a kind of a tender, a call for public participation on a potential sale of these properties, so privatizing the parks. Now the city has since come and said, no, we're only doing that to determine the market value of the property so that we can increase our lease prices for the people leasing these properties, and that's fine. That's cool if that's what they're doing. But my interest in this has been the reaction to it. And I don't mean like from ANC comrades saying, we oppose privatization and kind of Marx tells us we're not allowed to privatize. No, the ANC was quiet on this. The EFF was quiet on this. The Good Party, Patricia DeLille's outfit, they supported kind of selling these to developers for low cost housing. They have a very bad reason for it. They say that this is a quote historically privileged, well located part of Johannesburg, so they want to privatize it for spite and so on. But I don't care why they want to do it. I just care that they support it. But no, the comrades were quiet. It was the DA, the South Africa's Free Market Capitalist Party, that said that this is completely unacceptable. And not just the DA, and I'm not going to name names, but a lot of people on kind of social media who I consider to truly be libertarians and kind of classical liberals and capitalists and so on, saying this is ridiculous. We cannot do this. We need these green belts and green spaces in our city, and if you privatize it, it's going to bring in low cost housing. It's going to be these ugly, drab um, um, kind of apartment blocks and so on, and therefore we must oppose it. And there was a petition that went around to kind of stop this, and now it's led to this kind of the city kind of saying no, we never plan to privatize it and so on. So it's not going to happen. I wish it was, but for me the interesting thing is the reaction to it. You would have imagined that with stories like let me take a few examples here. I'll share my screen. Let's see here, share screen, window, this one. With stories like this, so this is the Free State provincial government recently spent more than 270 million rand on failed road maintenance project, as if road maintenance is kind of rocket science and it's something that you can get wrong. But this money has been spent, so tenderers have been paid, but no road has been laid. So cool stuff. Excellent, good work, guys. Then we have a more recent story in Johannesburg itself, where they basically say that this is the business model in the city. It says well-performing SOEs that the city owns, like Joburg Water. I was surprised to hear this is a well-performing SOE. The money is taken from them to subsidize badly performing SOEs in Joburg, like City Power. But you can look at some other examples. They have Metrobus is one of the other bad performing SOEs, and there's kind of many other SOEs that the city owns. So you have this kind of cross subsidization, which means that money is necessarily going to go to things other than what it was earmarked for. That is to say, if Joburg Water gets paid money to do its thing, some of that money goes elsewhere to badly managed, badly governed projects of the city and SOEs. So another story, this is from earlier this year, the Johannesburg official who paid 62.5 million rand for cars that were never delivered. And this story on Daily Investor basically says 20 vehicles were never delivered, they were paid for. And this official was kind of found guilty of this misconduct, and his punishment was let me find it here. It was, of course, a suspension with full pay. I mean, I don't even have to mention that this is how it works in South Africa, because we all know this is how it works. But he was demoted. My goodness, he was demoted to what? Janitor? No, to fleet compliance management deputy director for 12 months. So it was a temporary demotion. We really showed that guy for kind of stealing money and kind of making 62.5 million rand of ratepayers' money disappear into the ether. Now, cool. So now that's just the context. I mean, if I spend an hour on this, I'll be able to get 100 more examples. So people now say, no, the parks have to remain in the custodianship and the trusteeship of the municipality. And I don't understand. And I hope you guys can maybe help me understand how otherwise sensible people. Now I get it. There's arguments for we need parks. Cool. I can accept that. Like, that's fine. We need parks. Cool. But if you go throughout South Africa and you see, oh, look in the distance, there's a green space, and it's a suburb, it's going to be private homes primarily. If you look in the distance and see, oh, there's a kind of a brown, dusty space over there, and it's a suburb, it's going to be leasehold. It's going to be a township of state subsidized and state built housing. So if your concern is green space, in my view, you want it to be private. So yeah, I guess Ayanda, let's start with you. How do you make sense of this story that seemingly otherwise sensible people are so, I don't know if it's a knee-jerk reaction or what, or if it's really a considered position, but just so desperately want the state to own important kind of open spaces near to where we live on our behalf when we know this is how it works in South Africa. What's your take?
Well, I think I would like to first start by saying that this isn't my forte. I haven't really done an in-depth study into this. But what I can tell you for a fact, uh, being someone who lives in Pretoria and who walks around the area a lot, there are many parks in Pretoria that you can go to, and I can promise you, you will struggle to find one well-maintained park in Pretoria. Many of them have been neglected. They are in a very, very, very bad state. In a bad state, they're dirty. There's litter all over the place. I think the other concern that I have with not just parks in Pretoria, but parks all over the country is the issue of makeshift houses. You have people setting up structures in these parks, and they sleep there. In fact, you have communities of I mean hobos, to be frank, who sleep there. They consume their drugs there, and they do all sorts of things there. And there's even muggings that take place in some of those parks. I would know this for a fact. So my major concern with things being managed by the municipality vis-a-vis the state is that often there's no incentive to manage these things properly, to ensure that they're kept clean. There's always going to be some level of neglect that you're going to see. Whereas the important thing that you said in your article is that privatizing these things brings them into the realm of responsibility. So once you have someone privately owning that park, there's a good chance that that person is going to maintain that park, ensure that it's clean, and they're also going to control access to it. Because as I said, part of the problem is you have many hobos who go into the parks and they create makeshift structures there and they live there, and they make it difficult for people who actually want to come to the park and sit or do whatever they want to do to come into the park and do that. They, in a sense, take over the park and they make it their own space. And that is my issue. Whereas if you have someone privately owning the park, that is going to be difficult because access is controlled and no one can't just enter for any reason or to do anything that they want to do. So for me, at this point, with the limited information that I have, I think privatization makes sense. You could apply the same argument in many other areas. Private institutions in this country are always managed well. There's an incentive when someone privately owns something to manage it well. Whereas if it's managed by the state, the condition of these places is always poor. There's no maintenance, and you get a sense that no one actually cares about these spaces. So for me, what makes sense is to privatize them. Really, that is going to ensure that we limit access to those spaces and they are well maintained, and whoever wants to use them can use them. But a situation where they are managed by the municipality, there is no incentive to do that. What makes it worse, there is no incentive to go in there as well and remove those hobos who have taken over many of these parks in South Africa and pose a risk to surrounding communities because when they are there, they're often a gang. There isn't one or two people, there's a community of them living in there, and they tend to terrorize people in the surrounding areas as well. So it's very important to deal with that for those reasons.
Yeah, Nicholas, I'm in your neck of the woods every now and then, and kind of the comeback is always like, oh well, that might be what's happening in the north, but down here, our government kind of manages things better. But what struck me, and I'm not putting you on the spot to speak about this specific situation, but what struck me, like driving around Stellenbosch in this case, Stellenbosch, is that when you drive into the town from the north, you drive south into the town, there is like a ridge above a very well-to-do, wealthy kind of development, like an estate. There's a ridge right above it, and that ridge is a shanty town. So it's just a shanty town. There's no more ridge left. It used to be a green space with trees and kind of a beautiful vista. It is now basically a city. It is basically a city. Um, then there has been the example of, and I don't know if you guys watched Joe Emilio's Stolen Ground documentary recently, the Tigerberg Raceway. And people kind of in their mind's eye, they see, oh, it's a poor area, so it makes sense, my goodness, that this now became just kind of part of it, got swallowed up by the surrounding poverty. But no, if you go back not long, maybe 10 years, uh, Tegerberg Raceway it's a suburban area. It's a suburban area. Like Brackenfell, I think, is just there, and so on. But now it is a shanty town, state owned. It was state owned property. So does what we've been saying apply to well governed areas as well? Nicholas, what's your sense? Is privatization a good thing in principle, or are we in the north just kind of manifesting our trauma from being governed by the ANC?
I think, Martin, what you're forgetting is who will build the parks? Without government, who will build the parks? But Cape Town is NIMBY central, not in my backyard central. We've got a hang of a lot of incredibly privileged people in the southern suburbs, especially where I live. And I love the southern suburbs. And I think a lot of people here are not bad people. They're just incredibly naive and they're very ignorant of a lot of things. And I think that when they hear the word privatization, they don't think about what it actually means. They think, oh, Amazon's going to come in here and they're going to build a giant mega block and it's going to ruin my property values and all that. There's a lot of people who are incentivized to not want developments because they think that it will raise the supply of houses, which will then lower the value of their property. That's a problem. That's possibly one of the problems with a free market in real estate. There's literally no bare solution though. So we're going to keep. It's a bug that we're just going to have to live with. Is that real estate's a speculative asset? So a lot of people, well, just remove regulations and so developers can just keep building. Again, I've solved that question right now. But to not get sidetracked, the silly thing about a lot of Cape Townians and their not wanting parks to be privatized is that all of our good parks are effectively privatized, if not officially in practice. So there's a hang of a lot of parks in Cape Town. A lot of them are terrible. They're these dust bowls with shanty towns, as you mentioned. Those are state owned, those are state run, and also they're in areas where it doesn't really make sense for there to be a park. So I've literally seen people with parks right next to a highway. And those ones are not going to be maintained. It doesn't make sense. Then there's parks which are basically privately owned. A lot of people go to schools, private schools, and the Model C schools, which are effectively privatized. And the schools have generously allowed people over the weekends to walk on the school grounds. So those are maintained because it's a school. They've got a community. They've got a board of governors. They've got funders. So those are maintained, and people like that. We then have our sports clubs. We've got, and they maintain grounds. Those are privately run. They've got members who pay for their fees, and they maintain amazing grounds. We've got wine farms and estates, which are definitely privately owned. Those are maintained well. You can go to Groot Constantia and you can walk in the vineyards. That's very nice. But even when it comes to our technically public parks, the good ones are not maintained by the government. They are maintained, and you will have a lot of them are. I'm not even sure. I'm pretty sure a lot of them are owned by a private trust. But even the ones which aren't, there is a friends of that park. And they are actually the ones putting all that money in that park because they know it benefits them. And they're the ones who are kicking out the squatters. They're the ones who are putting up fences. There's a lot of public parks which are literally, that people have fenced them off without permission from the government because you're not allowed to do that to public property, but the government's not doing anything about it. And this is in Cape Town. This is in, the first world at the tip of Africa. We have our communities going out and fencing off public parks to ensure that they don't become drug dens. And it's not the government that comes and cleans these places up. It's the private citizens. It's people living around the park who enjoy the park, and they've got a vested interest in keeping it clean. They're being very silly by thinking that by privatizing it, that's going to change. If anything, we'll just give them increased control. I think that is the main issue, is that they think that privatization can only take one form, which is the incredibly corrupt Soviet shock therapy, which was not shock therapy, and it was more Soviet than privatization. A proper good privatization process should be a transparent auction that takes into account many mitigating factors. It should take into account should take into account who's actually been using it, who does it benefit. Communities should get a first dibs, and if they can't actually prove that they can actually that they deserve it, then it goes on to the next factor, things like that. All the stuff that can happen, but I think that people think immediately, oh no, a big skyscraper is going to be put next to my house. And also, I don't know why they think that privatizing is going to cause low cost housing. That's not what's going to happen. If you privatize some of these areas, if it is going to be developed, it's going to be a luxury apartment building. This is Cape Town, for God's sake. We don't build low cost housing. It doesn't make sense for us, and that's part of the problem with our property prices. But I think that a lot of it, just as I said from the beginning, comes from naivety, and I think that definitely privatize all of it. And the privatization can only lead to good things. And these private owners, they've shown, especially in Cape Town, that they don't mind people coming into their properties. People are actually quite nice. I know we have a lot of arguments, but a lot of people in general, if it's not going to cost them, if people aren't going to come in and vandalize the property, they're going to be like, yeah, no, fine, come through. And in fact, it benefits a lot of them because foot traffic leads to less crime. So just as an example, so Kierban Park, which is near where I live, it is attached to the cricket club and to Rondebosch Boys High School. So it's literally 3 different entities. So there's technically the municipal part of the park, which is kept alive by the Friends of Kierban Park, which are private citizens who clean it up, who have donated materials to build a skate park there, to build an outdoor gym there, to build a little kids' gym there. None of it's the municipality putting it. Then there's the cricket club, which generously allows people to just walk their dogs there, even though the dogs, and I say this as someone with dogs and who loves dogs, the dogs pester the people playing sports who actually pay membership there, but yet they allow the people to use it as a public space. And then there's Rondebosch Boys High School, which is a public school, but as I said, Model C in Cape Town at least is private. It's mostly funded by school fees and by donors. And they allow this amazing park for anyone can just go there free of charge. And also, we do actually have homeless people on it. The problem is, though, we know with South Africa's legislation, it's hard to kick out even if you have a private space. With our legislation, it's hard to kick out squatters unless you wall off the entire thing. And this is big enough that you will probably not even be able to do that, even if they were allowed.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, the key thing is this, and this is what Johannesburg has already kind of now clarified, is that they have a rent-seeking interest in maintaining these parks. And I think a lot of I would be surprised if that's not the case in the Cape as well, with these kind of technically municipally owned ones that I think are probably being leased to the sports club and so forth. So they are making money. The municipality is making money from leasing these things out, and that's what kind of the Johannesburg municipality is trying to do with this offer for sale. They want to determine the market value so that they can charge more lease fees, and that is, I mean, to some people listening, it might come as a surprise, but that's not the point of government. It's not to lease out property and make money. The government really, and some people might be upset with me for saying this, but the government's money must come from taxes. It must be coerced out of us, and that must go to a very small number of public order functions that the state fulfills. But no, so the government owns these things, and in that lies the risk. And I think the risk is less for the Cape, but certainly more here. And it was manifested with, I think it was the country club that's based at one of these, the Killarney Country Club. They said when they heard about this offer for sale of the parks that no one engaged with them about this, but now their country club that they built privately with private money, like millions of rands of private money on state public property, no one spoke to them, and now it's being sold. And the government can do that. They can do that. Why? Because they're the owner. and it's probably all in some contract that makes it very clear. So there's always that risk that even though it's effectively private and you're running it as a private company and as a private association, that some new MEC or something or MMC might just have a friend that now wants to get your property for some other reason, and now it's going to be leased out to them, and even that person, that new developer, is not going to be in a safe space because necessarily it's still state property. And this is where kind of the conversation with some of these otherwise sensible people gets tough, because I think it's important for us as free marketeers to acknowledge that yes, it could be turned into low cost housing. That is something that can happen if you privatize that property. That is going to drive down your value of your property. It's a reality. But we say that not in the abstract. We're not saying that in a vacuum. We're saying that in a reality where various Pretoria suburbs, I think specifically kind of in the northwest-ish areas, have gone from being normal green suburbs to basically being kind of valueless, dilapidated areas. Why? Because shanty towns kind of started filtering into open areas in four ways where I used to live in Johannesburg. Like it's an upmarket area, but between two main roads there was a large open space, and now there's a city in that open space, a shanty town. That leads to property values being eviscerated. It's done. It's over. Like, you can worry and piss and moan about, it's going to be low cost housing. Oh, woe is me, and woe is my property value. You can choose between it being low cost housing or no cost housing, because those are your two choices. It's either low cost or no cost. No cost is guaranteed, not immediately, eventually, because the PI Act that you kind of alluded to, Nicholas, it's not going anywhere, not anytime soon. The types of laws in our country that prohibits you as a community, as even as a municipality, from evicting trespassers and unlawful occupiers, specifically of municipal property, it is extremely difficult. The effort is it's not worth it to even try, because you can't, because you have to now 20,000 people live in that small property. You need to now find alternative accommodation for them. It is beyond the pale impossible. And the only solution really that I've come to see that's practical and humane is to say, listen, you have to get these assets off the government's asset register. Otherwise, you're guaranteeing this eventuality. Poor South Africans are not doing anything wrong by moving to wealthier areas. That's where jobs are. They're acting rationally. They're acting very, very rationally, and we shouldn't be blaming them. We should be blaming the incentive structure, the inherent incentive structure that says, oh, you can just go there, you can just go and live there. If I had to flee South Africa, for example, I would not go and live in Angola or something. I would want to go to a comfortable Western country where I can kind of prosper. So it's very rational to flee towards prosperity and to go into prosperity. So you can't blame me for doing that, but you should blame that country if it just allows me to plop myself down in front of someone else's house and kind of just now live there. It would be the fault of the structure. So I think we need to be very kind of honest about, yes, privatization isn't always going to solve, it's not always going to be the ideal outcome for everyone involved. But given our options, given our experience, it is something that we just have to commit to if we want to protect public order and safety, and yes, even property values, because that's just, low cost housing is still organized formal housing, as opposed to a shanty town. So yeah, we're coming up on the end of our show. We're only doing an hour today. I want to give you both an opportunity for last words on this topic or any other. Ayanda, let's start with you.
Well, I do think, as you've said, Martin, that privatization is not always going to give us the kind of outcomes we want. But if you are to compare it with other alternatives, it does appear to offer more, I'd say, more advantages in this case for me. And as I said earlier on, What's important for me, and I think what's important for many other people, is public order, its safety, and that the place is well maintained. Our experience with government in Pretoria and across the country has been that they've failed to manage these parks. These parks have become drug dens, as Nicholas said. They've become shanty towns. They've become places where people go and do all sorts of things. They're vandalized, they aren't clean, and they aren't well maintained. And I do think, and I'm going to say this again, that these institutions being in the hands of private actors is going to lead us to a point where they are well maintained, they're well taken care of, and people in the surrounding areas as well can use them. There are many examples of these parks that are well managed, where you have private owners as well working with the municipality to ensure that they're in a good state. But privatization in this case, as I've said, ensures that these areas are well maintained. There's order in them, and also access as well is controlled, because what you want to avoid is a situation where squatters can just enter the area and set up their structures, and then devalue as well the prices of property around them. What you want is to avoid that. If the discussion is about low cost housing, there is a way to do that. I think that is a very important discussion that maybe next time or some other time you can look into. But what is important is to show that these spaces remain green spaces where people can come there and be safe and not feel threatened by people who are in the vicinity of them. Because, as I said earlier on, once you have the area being a shanty town, you make it difficult for people in the neighborhood to come there as well. Whereas if those issues are not there, people are able to come freely and use the park, they don't feel threatened as well. So privatization works in this context for me because it ensures that there's order, there's safety, and the place is well maintained. The government cannot manage anything; it can't take care of things. It can't do anything really, so we can't trust it to continue managing parks. These parks need to be handed over to people who I believe are best placed to take care of them because they use these spaces as well, and these spaces are located in their own communities.
Yeah, well said. Nicholas, last words from you.
I just want to comment on the fact that the Cape Tonians' concern with low-cost housing devaluing their houses, it doesn't even lead to that. There's a lot of low-cost residential developments happening in Pinelands, for instance, and the price of houses in Pinelands keep going up anyway. They're scared of nothing. I also wanted to add that they should also not be afraid of these parks and these green areas to being overdeveloped. There's a reason they haven't been developed. The government, people have this idea the government's this generous benefactor, and like, oh no, we could make so much money if this place was developed, but we're being nice. You can use it as a park. No, most of this is wetland. It's doesn't have the right soil to build houses on it. There's a reason people haven't built stuff on it. And by privatizing it, all we'll be doing is ensuring that it goes to a community or to an entity that will actually look after it or keep it safe. A private security company could probably even want to buy one because it would probably make their life easier if they could control this area that might be used as transit point for criminals. Imagine if ADT owned a one of those green belts between different neighborhoods. They could be like, okay, we can access control the sides. Now we don't have to worry about all these houses getting burgled.
Exactly, yeah, and they could present it as corporate social investment, so it's kind of a double kind of benefit. For instance, for a security company, but I think the key thing that is often lost, especially by the people who favor the state owning it, who are kind of community actors, is that why is the community not trying to privatize it into the community? So that to me, that's the saddest part of this, because I know a lot of these are very good people, but they are being they're rent seekers. They are acting in a rent seeking way because they say no, it has to stay a park and I should be able to go there and walk my dog there, but more than that I do not want to do. I don't want to kind of contribute to maintaining it. I don't want to think about it when I'm not going there. No, the right thing for your community to do, if this is really so important to you, is to get everyone together, and it's usually wealthy areas. So always remember that. Get the people together, get a few benefactors, and say, cool, we will buy the park. We will then buy the park, and it will be a community park owned privately by the community, and we will invest our time and money into that park. And I think that'll be epic. That'll be that is the way a community park should work. It should be owned by that community and maintained by that community and paid for by that community, because otherwise you're asking for your bread to be buttered on both sides, and that's just not how life works. There is no reality in which you get the guarantee of a park that will always be a park, and it will always be safe, and it will always be ideal and idyllic, but you don't have to do anything. Sorry, it's not going to work like that. Not in our political reality, as I think you've both pointed out. That is not the world that we live in. Life is just a series of trade-offs, and the more you lift your hind from your seat and go and be the change that you want to see in the world, as they say, the better the outcomes will be. And the more you want to outsource those outcomes to the benevolent state, the more disappointed you are guaranteed to be. Um, you just cannot get away from that. You have to come to terms with the political reality that defines South Africa, yes, but local government in South Africa very specifically. There is no knight in shining armor municipality, not even Cape Town, not Stellenbosch, not Hermanus. None of the best governed municipalities in this country are free from exactly the problems that we have been discussing. And they are just getting worse. The Free Market Foundation went on a roadshow. We spoke to specifically those municipalities, and they said that this is a mounting problem. This is a problem that's getting worse, of refugees. Please take me to the Human Rights Commission, of refugees coming into their municipality and expecting services. Again, do not blame the refugees. They're acting rationally. But the fact that these spaces were available for occupation, that is a problem. And it's a problem that's going to get worse unless something substantial and fundamental is done to change the nature of those properties. But that is it for us, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me today. That I think, well, okay, so today was the tariff thing starting. I'm going to try this again, what I tried last week. Hopefully next week, we can do an episode where we aren't going to be speaking too much about South Africa's foreign relations, but we'll likely already start hearing some of the consequences of these tariffs and South Africa's inability or unwillingness, the ANC's unwillingness again, to engage constructively with the Americans. I'm sure we'll hear about how Russia and China will solve all of our problems, so we don't need the Americans. But hopefully everyone is looking forward to that. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Click the bell icon to be notified of any new updates that we upload. And please browse over to rationalstandard.co.za, where we upload primarily our written content, specifically being managed by Nicholas there. Thank you very much for that, Nick. And also, if you're feeling so inclined, if you disagree with what we've said on this podcast, please write a rebuttal and send it over to Rational Standard, and we'll be glad to publish it if it's of high quality. I know a lot of you Parky people are probably going to be very upset about what's just been said, so we look forward to that as well. But that is it from us. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Cheerio.